Lin undergoes a class transfer ritual along with his high school classmates, obtaining the extremely rare and powerful Necromancer profession. He gains skills to summon undead warriors and burn enemy souls. Lin easily defeats monsters and reaches level 7 in the beginner dungeon in just 10 hours, astonishing his principal and peers. He travels to the Imperial Exchange District to take on higher-level missions, determined to rapidly gain power and entry to the prestigious Xiajing Academy like his sister. The dungeon difficulty was categorized as normal, nightmare, and hell. This particular mission required nightmare level or higher completion. Lin shook his head. He was still too weak at the moment. The city gate guard held the exit permit provided by Lin and verified his information. Although the guards were puzzled by how a level 7 student was allowed to leave the city, the exit permit was genuine. The city gate guard quickly approved the verification. The guard advised Lin to stay safe and cautious as he walked out of the city gate. A cold wind blew against him, and the sky immediately darkened, creating a heavy atmosphere. Inside and outside, the city felt like two different worlds. Lin sensed the presence of goblins behind him and summoned his skeletal soldiers to attack the level 10 goblin. Compared to his level 7 skeleton warriors, this goblin was too weak. Lin felt excited as he summoned all of his skeleton warriors and charged towards the large goblin army. He clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anticipation. At this rate, reaching level 15 before the major exam shouldn't be a problem. He then recalled how his sister had already reached level 16 before her own major exam, and he wondered how she had achieved such progress. He couldn't wait to see his sister. After a while, his level increased to 10. And his talents and skills were both upgraded. He could now summon bronze-level skeleton warriors with his greatly increased spiritual energy. Lin eagerly summoned a bronze-level skeleton warrior. The bronze-level skeleton warrior no longer had the gray color, but instead had a pale greenish-white hue. The weapon in its hand had transformed into an axe. Its base attributes were astonishingly high, reaching 1500. Moreover, it possessed a skill called Rampage Strike, which dealt double damage to the target and had a cooldown of 10 minutes. As Lin was about to continue summoning bronze-level skeleton warriors, the sound of a breaking wind echoed, followed by several arrows flying past him. Multiple arrows flew right in front of him, and one of them struck him. His passive skill automatically redirected all the damage to the skeleton warrior, so Lin himself was unharmed. A figure dressed in black emerged from the forest, running at high speed with impressive agility. She noticed Lin and swiftly changed direction, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Judging by her attire, Lin could roughly determine her profession as an assassin. Then two persons appeared. They were an archer and a mage. Unable to catch the girl, they asked Lin where the person had gone. Instead of answering, Lin spoke coldly. "You shot me with an arrow. Apologize." The archer looked at the arrow on the ground, realizing what had happened, and also apologized. Although puzzled as to why the arrow didn't cause any harm, the mage's expression grew gloomy, clearly unhappy about the escape. He turned his gaze to the skeleton warriors, his eyes filled with disgust, and slowly raised his staff. However, the archer suddenly pulled the mage back and walked the other way. Upon seeing the retreating figures, Lin remarked that these two individuals couldn't be too high-leveled, probably around level 20 at most. Lin contemplated the possibility of resorting to killing if he were attacked. The bronze-level skeleton warriors effortlessly defeated the monsters around, resembling someone mowing a lawn. However, Lin's progress in leveling started to slow down. Nightfall approached, leaving Lin still needing 30% more experience to reach level 11. He didn't plan to return as time was limited, and he couldn't waste it on travel. His determination to join Xiajing Academy drove him to work harder than anyone else. Setting up a campfire in the forest, Lin ate while lost in thought. He couldn't understand how his sister had reached level 16. There was something he overlooked. As he recalled his sister's return from the western outskirts, injured all over, Lin started connecting the dots. He merged his school knowledge with the outskirts information and realized something. The Western Sea Mine Dungeon. Did his sister team up with others to tackle that dangerous dungeon? Despite being a nightmare level, this revelation fueled Lin's curiosity. He vowed to investigate the Western Sea Mine Dungeon once he became stronger and reached a higher level. He believed it held the key to understanding his sister's rapid progress. Feeling assured of his theory, Lin clenched his fist. The skeleton warriors lurked in the night as Lin began meditating. Suddenly, one of them alerted him, breaking his concentration. A figure emerged, the same black-clad person who had escaped earlier that afternoon. The girl asked if there was any food available, and Lin handed her a sweet potato. The girl didn't show any signs of disdain, and eagerly devoured the food, revealing her face by removing her mask. She began to thank him, but suddenly broke into a violent cowing fit. While still cugging, she continued to talk to Lin, who handed her a bottle of water. After she finally managed to speak clearly, she asked for his name. However, when Lin didn't answer, she suggested they both use a detection spell on each other. Lin thought for a moment and agreed. They both activated a detection spell at the same time, their fingertips glowing faintly as they cast the spell on each other. Surprisingly, the spell didn't work for Lin, and he couldn't gather any information about the girl. The girl giggled suddenly, looking triumphant. Even though it was her first time encountering a necromancer like Lin, she now knew his name and level. She began speaking rapidly. Lin, staying calm, asked why the girl was so pleased. He wanted to know her reason for being excited. Looking directly at Lin, the girl smiled and revealed a badge-like item, a screening badge. She explained, "Wearing this badge, anyone whose level isn't more than 10 levels higher than yours won't be detected by spells." She put away her badge, and Lin nodded before trying the detection spell again. This time, it worked. Level 19. Shadow Assassin. A gentle breeze passed by, and Ning Yi's smile disappeared instantly. Lin also turned to a specific direction. Besides the archer and mage they had met earlier, there was now a knight holding a giant shield. The three surrounded them from different sides. Just as the girl was about to run away, an arrow shot from the darkness. Ning Yi swiftly dodged to the side. The arrow exploded suddenly, splitting into two streaks of light that landed on Lin and Ning Yi. These weren't ordinary arrows, they were marker arrows. Red marks appeared above both Lin and Ning Yi's heads. The sound of cold laughter filled the air as the mage they had encountered before emerged from the forest. They considered Lin as part of the girl's group. The girl attempted to explain that Lin had nothing to do with her, but the three individuals clearly didn't believe her. The archer on the tree chuckled and decided to kill both of them so no one would know about their possession of intermediate skill scrolls. Ning Yi whispered to Lin, "I'll keep them busy. You should go on your own." Lin looked at her and asked, "What about you?" The girl didn't want Lin to get into danger. As a shadow assassin, she might have escaped before, but being marked by the archer's arrow now rendered her stealth ability useless, making it hard for her to flee. The mage raised his staff, getting ready to attack. Suddenly the staff glowed brightly, and a huge ball of light rose into the sky, lighting up the surroundings brightly. Ning Yi's hand sparkled, and a blue dagger appeared as she tensed up. The archer perched in the tree had his bow fully drawn, prepared to shoot. The knight stood firm with his shield, ready to charge. The mage's staff gleamed brightly. In that moment, Lin raised his finger slightly, summoning a skeleton warrior in front of him. The mage showed a mix of disdain and disgust. He shouted, conjuring a massive fireball, around a meter in diameter, bursting into flames and hurtling towards them. Ning Yi's expression changed, and she pulled Lin back. However, while they were retreating, Ning Yi felt a sudden heaviness in her body, and their speed drastically slowed down. An invisible thread extended from the mage's staff, entangling her feet. The archer also took action. An arrow was shot, but halfway through its trajectory, it split into three. Meanwhile, the knight launched his charge, rushing towards the two of them at an astonishing speed. The girl suddenly exerted force and pushed Lin away, moving him out of the range of the attack. At that moment, two skeleton warriors appeared on either side of Ning Yi. The knight collided with the skeleton warriors, but while the skeleton warriors remained motionless, the knight was sent flying backward. The archer's triple shot landed on the skeleton warriors, creating metallic impact sounds amidst the flames. The skeleton warriors slowly emerged, radiating a pale blue glow, showing no signs of injury. With a single thought, the skeletal warrior sprang into action with lightning speed. The mage's face turned pale, his staff trembling in his hand. He quickly conjured a glowing energy shield around himself, the mage's signature defensive skill. Unlike agile archers, mages were not known for speed or dexterity. Moreover, he was now completely surrounded by the skeletal warriors, leaving no room for escape. As one skeletal warrior raised its blade, the mage's energy shield warped and contorted violently. The mage's expression changed drastically, realizing one strike could shatter his shield. He couldn't believe these skeletons possessed such terrifying power. What attributes did they have? He had no time to contemplate as a second warrior's blade descended, shattering the energy shield on impact, dispersing it into countless twinkling stars. In desperation, the mage unleashed a resistant flame ring skill. A massive ring of fire erupted outwards, pushing back several nearby skeletons over 10 meters with its force. But before the mage could even celebrate, darkness enveloped his vision. 2 skeletons had already leapt above, blades glinting. With no chance to use any more skills, the mage's head was severed in an instant. In just 2 seconds, the mage met his demise. The archer trying to evade the warriors wasn't faring well either. Having witnessed the mage's gruesome death firsthand, fear flooded his mind. More agile than the mage, he repeatedly used evasive maneuvers to break free from the encircling skeletons. But despite his efforts, escape proved impossible. The warriors closed in step by step, restricting his space more and more. He didn't understand how these bony warriors could move so swiftly. Unlike the other 2, only the knight seemed able to hold his ground. His body emitting a glowing radiance, he repeatedly activated a charging skill, racing towards open spaces. This glowing layer securely protected him even when the skeletons struck, their blades unable to inflict any harm. He knew this was a limitless defense skill, one that few knights could master. Recalling his knowledge, it was one of the core knight abilities. Once activated, it granted immense defense for a short period. Relying on his limitless defense, the knight desperately fled as a pain scream echoed behind him. The archer had met his demise too. With both mage and archer dead, the knight was thoroughly frightened. How could these skeleton warriors be so terrifying? If he had known, he would never have come. This mediocre skill scroll wasn't worth losing his life over. Lin had no intention of letting him escape. There was no turning back now. Lin would ensure a clean kill. One skeleton warrior's blade glowed red as it activated the Rampage Strike skill, dealing double its normal damage. The knight was shocked that a mere undead would use such skills. The powerful red sword struck, instantly disabling the knight's protective limitless defense spell. More swift blows followed, rapidly wearing down the spell's duration. Moreover, more warriors surrounded the knight, cutting off any chance of escape. Overwhelmed, a sense of hopelessness washed over him. After a dozen merciless seconds, the unwilling knight was struck down. Lin recalled his sister's advice. Either don't act, or act decisively without hesitation. That was exactly how he commanded his skeleton force, decisively ending the battle in just 20 seconds, without moving an inch himself. He simply directed his skeleton army to kill all 3 enemies. The warriors returned, carrying items they had picked up. When someone died, their storage space contents would drop. Neatly arranged in front of Lin were 4 bronze-tier weapons and equipment snatched from the bodies. A staff, bow, shield, and sword. Ning Yi informed Lin these were obtained from the Carmen Orc Legion's dungeon. Puzzled, Lin asked about it since he had never heard of that dungeon before. Noticing his confusion, Ning Yi explained. The Carmen Orc Legion dungeon is a level 20 dungeon located outside Zhaohai City. She added that the 4 bronze pieces would be useless to Lin, but sellable for some decent money. Without hesitation, Lin collected them along with some other items like furs, bones, and plants, saying as long as there's value, it's worth taking. The last item was a valuable 10,000 gold beginner skill scroll. Unsure whether to use or sell it, Lin held the scroll pondering as Ningyi noticed his indecision. To her, 10,000 gold was a pittance for a beginner scroll. When Lin asked how to use it, chuckling Ningyi claimed he just had to hold it and yell, "Use." Lin examined the mischievous girl, realizing she had tried to prank him. Though inexperienced with scrolls, Lin wasn't foolish enough to believe their magic hinged merely on the volume of his voice. There was more to it than that. Calmly, Lin attempted to unlock the scroll's power using his own spiritual energy rather than shouting commands at it. Silently, Lin worked to channel his energy into the scroll. Meanwhile, Ningyi watched him expectantly, still waiting for him to bellow, "Use!" But to her surprise and dismay, without a sound, the scroll suddenly erupted with brilliant light, enveloping Lin's body. He had discovered the true activation method on his own, rather than falling for her little joke. In the glowing sphere of light, a notification appeared before Lin. Acquired skill, Corpse Explosion. The macabre but powerful new skill could detonate corpses to damage nearby enemies. Corpse Explosion is currently at level 1. At first glance, the skill description may not seem outstanding. The range is only 1 meter. But Lin saw something different in it. This is an AoE skill. If he were to face thousands of enemies, relying on the skeleton warriors to defeat them one by one would be too slow. It would take too much time. However, with this skill, all he needs to do is kill one enemy. Then he can detonate the corpse, causing damage to the enemies within the skill's range. As more enemies are killed and more corpses are formed, he can continue to detonate the corpses one after another. Ningyi blinked her big eyes, her face filled with curiosity, and asked if Lin had gotten a new skill. Lin nodded. Lin didn't blame Ningyi for trying to prank him earlier. Ningyi smiled happily, complimenting Lin's voice and hoped he could talk more often. Lin looked at her. This woman seemed different from the girls in his school. She was lively and playful. "Your voice sounds nice too," Lin rarely complimented others. Ningyi appeared delighted and took out a box, placing it directly into Lin's hands. It was an intermediate skill scroll. In the exchange market, the price of an intermediate skill scroll could reach up to 1 million gold coins, 100 times the price of a beginner skill scroll. Ningyi had mentioned that the people chasing her were after this scroll. How could she just give it away like that? Ningyi sat down by the campfire and extended her hands to warm them up. With the people who were chasing her now taken care of, Ningyi felt a wave of relaxation wash over her. She had stumbled upon a stroke of luck inside the Carmen Orc Legion's camp. She found a chest that appeared randomly, by chance. Ningyi had come across it and obtained this intermediate skill scroll. Unfortunately, those few individuals had spotted her with it, leading to her being hunted down. Lin looked at Ningyi and waited for her to finish speaking before softly saying, "You almost died just now." Ningyi smiled and explained that if she received a fatal injury, she would be automatically teleported away, but she still feared pain. Well, Lin realized he had been unnecessarily worried. The girl was not an ordinary girl. She had more than enough artifacts to keep her safe, so she couldn't die. Ningyi reached out her hand and asked if there was any food left. Lin took out several steamed buns which he obtained from the earlier battle, totaling more than 10. Ningyi shook her head, indicating that she didn't want anything from those people. Lin chuckled and exchanged the buns for sweet potatoes. Ningyi happily took the sweet potato and started eating it. Watching Ningyi savoring the food, it seemed truly delicious. Lin continued her questioning, and Lin answered that he intended to go to Xinjiang Academy. In her eyes, with Lin's abilities, he would have no problem passing any academy entrance exams. Suddenly, Ningyi thought of something and told Lin that after he arrived at Xinjiang Academy, he must challenge the Divine Tower and aim for the highest floor possible. The rewards for the first-time challenge would be doubled, and it would earn him a substantial amount of points in the academy. Points were more valuable than gold, it seemed. Ningyi seemed to be quite knowledgeable about Xinjiang Academy and passionately explained its details to Lin. As she spoke, Lin's mind started to form a rough image of Xinjiang Academy. 99% of the time it was Ningyi doing the talking, and Lin simply listened, occasionally responding with a sentence or two. Eventually, Ningyi's voice faded away and she fell asleep. Lin removed his coat and offered it to Ningyi as a makeshift blanket, while he himself began to meditate. The next day, sunlight poured in. Lin's spiritual energy was fully replenished as he woke up from his meditation. Ningyi blinked her big eyes and looked at him with a cheerful smile. She reached out her hand asking for the sweet potato. Lin directly handed her a piece of sweet potato, but Ningyi felt it wasn't enough, so Lin took out another piece. Almost all of the 20-something sweet potatoes he had brought with him were given to Ningyi, and he didn't keep a single one for himself. Lin waved his hand and said, "There really are none left." "All right, I'll believe you have no more potatoes left," Ningyi said with a smile. Happily munching on her sweet potato, she bid Lin farewell, expressing her hope to adventure with him again after he became stronger. "Hurry and level up so you can take me along on a journey," she told him cheerfully. Ningyi departed swiftly, taking the last of the sweet potatoes and using Lin's coat as a makeshift blanket. Watching her leave, Lin softly muttered to himself, "I'll bring you along on adventures soon." Alone now, Lin noticed the forest air smelled faintly of blood. Gazing at 3 fresh corpses lying nearby, he remembered the new power he had acquired. Silently preparing himself, Lin walked over to the lifeless bodies to test his recently learned skill, Corpse Explosion. Kneeling by the first corpse, Lin unleashed the skill. Instantly, the body erupted with a thunderous blast, blowing surrounding trees to splinters. A crater several meters deep now yawned where the corpse had laid just a moment before. Lin was pleasantly surprised by the explosion's substantial power and wide 360-degree radius. After detonating the mage's corpse, Lin experimented on the other bodies, creating even larger blasts than the first. Eager to continue honing his new powers, Lin considered his next destination, the Western Sea Mine. After meditating to restore his spiritual energy reserves, Lin also summoned 4 additional skeleton warriors. Having now reached level 10 proficiency, his summoned skeleton skill transformed the warriors from black iron to sturdier bronze-class undead. However, the heightened skill also demanded more energy, now requiring 70 spiritual power to summon each skeleton soldier. He only has 300, then the summoning space 48 out of 100, and they're all skeleton warriors. He mentions there's no need to rush, and sooner or later, the summoning space will become full. As Lin got closer to the Western Sea Mine dungeon, he started to see people gathering around. The monsters on the way to the dungeon were mostly cleared out. Soon Lin caught sight of the entrance to the dungeon. It was a whirlpool similar to a newbie dungeon, but much larger. The whirlpool seemed to be emitting a constant aura of bloodlust. At the entrance of the dungeon, many people were waving flags and shouting, searching for team members. Several people were also gathered in front of the dungeon entrance, seemingly engaged in discussion and planning. Lin approached the entrance of the dungeon with a single skeleton warrior. He had kept the other skeleton warriors hidden, their bone friction making a sound that sent shivers down one's spine. Many people instinctively stepped back, creating a pathway for Lin. Arriving at the entrance of the dungeon, Lin checked the dungeon information. This was the real deal. Not a newbie dungeon designed for leveling up newcomers. The Mine Dungeon had 2 difficulty levels, offering normal and nightmare difficulties with no hell difficulty available. Even in normal difficulty, the monsters were already elite creatures, several times stronger than those outside. The nightmare difficulty featured even stronger elite monsters, with an even higher level of difficulty. Typically, normal difficulty required a 3-person team consisting of a tank, a damage dealer, and a support. The nightmare difficulty required a 5-person team with dual support and dual damage dealers. From this one could infer the difference in difficulty. The skeleton warrior stood silently beside Lin, showing no signs of movement. Finally, someone mustered the courage to use a detection spell, and it landed on both Lin and the skeleton warrior. A red light suddenly emanated from the hollow eye sockets of the skeleton warrior directed towards the person who cast the detection spell. This startled the person, and the detection spell yielded no results, providing no information. Lin was wearing the shielding emblem given by Ningyi. He didn't order the skeleton warrior to take action. It was just a detection spell, nothing serious. It seemed that everyone realized Lin was not an ordinary person, and started inviting him to join their teams. However, Lin declined. After reviewing the dungeon information, he chose the nightmare difficulty. Lin was teleported into the dungeon. Many people were shocked to see him entering the dungeon alone. They couldn't believe that someone would dare to enter a dungeon on their own. Some people approached the person who had used the detection spell earlier, asking for details. The person seemed slightly embarrassed and said he didn't see any information. Outside the dungeon, many people wore expressions of curiosity, as there had been numerous cases where overconfident individuals attempted to solo dungeons and ended up dying inside. The Western Sea Mine dungeon lived up to its name, with the terrain inside resembling an actual mine. The dungeon was filled with a heavy oppressive atmosphere accompanied by a strong stench of blood. Standing within a safe zone, Lin knew that venturing outside would result in immediate attacks. Lin cast a detection spell, revealing the true nature of the elite goblin monster. Its attributes were several times higher than those of ordinary creatures. A level 14 goblin with 800 strength, spirit 200, and constitution 1000 with a stun attack. Even a level 14 knight class profession wouldn't come close to matching half of its prowess. Without proper teamwork and coordination, defeating a nightmare-level dungeon would be a formidable challenge. Yet when compared to Lin's skeleton warriors, the difference in attributes was still vast. Lin summoned the skeleton warriors from the summoning space, and in an instant the room was filled with an army of them. Afterward, he stepped out of the safe zone, officially embarking on the journey through the dungeon. The goblin guard roared in excitement and charged at Lin, only to be met with the skeleton warriors' large axes. It was quickly dispatched with a few strikes, and Lin received a notification. You have slain a level 14 goblin guard and gained 200 experience. A tinge of excitement flashed through Lin's mind. The experience gained was about 10 times higher than that of monsters at the same level. Killing a single monster here was equivalent to killing 10 outside. Lin felt that he had found the right direction and immediately issued a command. The skeleton warriors swiftly rushed into the dungeon corridor with a clattering sound, like an unstoppable army. They slaughtered their way through, and messages kept appearing. The screen was filled with rapid notifications, not only gaining experience, but also obtaining numerous items and materials. Experience began to increase rapidly, and the number of materials kept growing. A detailed map of the dungeon quickly formed in Lin's mind. The mine dungeon was exactly as its name suggested, a mine inside. There were many passages interconnected in various directions. Just 5 minutes after entering the dungeon, a radiant light of leveling up appeared on Lin. He reached level 11, and upon leveling up, his spirit was fully restored. Lin immediately summoned 4 more skeleton warriors. He checked his own attributes and noticed that the increase in basic attributes had become more significant, with each level granting a boost of 20 attribute points, instead of the previous 10. His spirit had also increased by 100 points. Lin understood that as his level increased, the subsequent attribute boosts would become even greater. This realization came to him after reviewing his attributes. The 4 attributes of the skeleton warriors had reached a terrifying 1,700, and this overall change was within his expectations. However, the recently acquired corpse explosion skill remained at level 1 without any changes. Lin felt puzzled as to why the soul flame and summoned skeleton warrior skills had both improved, but the corpse explosion skill remained the same. He couldn't understand why. If Ning Yi were here, perhaps she would know. Lin thought of Ning Yi, the adorable girl who loved pranks and could talk endlessly. Her knowledge surpassed his own by a considerable margin. Setting aside the doubts in his mind for now, he continued moving deeper into the dungeon. Suddenly, a massive creature blocked the path. A giant wolf king appeared before Lin. The detection spell revealed it to be the Mine Wolf King, an elite boss with surprisingly high attributes. Lin encountered a boss-level monster for the first time, and it was an elite boss at that. Surprisingly, its 4 attributes were even higher than those of a skeleton warrior. Such a degree of strength was expected in a nightmare difficulty dungeon. The crimson eyes of the Wolf King locked onto Lin, emanating a bloodthirsty aura. However, in the end, it was just a wolf. Lin gave the command to attack, and the skeleton warriors swiftly charged towards the Mine Wolf King. The Mine Wolf King let out a fierce roar, unleashing its skills. A powerful shockwave erupted from its mouth. The leading skeleton warrior was sent flying by the impact. The remaining skeleton warriors, who were unaffected by the shockwave, used their skills, delivering rampage strikes. The skeleton warriors who hadn't been knocked back had already reached the Mine Wolf King and began slashing at it with their glowing red blades. The Wolf King howled in agony. Many skeleton warriors leaped high into the air, landing directly on the Wolf King's body and activating their skills with red glows. This scene closely resembled what Lin had witnessed during the day of his class transition. The skeleton warriors had also slain the mighty dragon in such a manner. The Mining Wolf King went into a frenzy, rolling and repeatedly crashing its massive body against the rocky walls of the mine, attempting to shake off the skeleton warriors clinging to it. It unleashed its roar skill once again, sending the surrounding skeleton warriors flying. This time, it used all its strength, maximizing the impact of the knockback effect. Suddenly, the Mine Wolf King turned around and limped towards the passage. Lin was slightly taken aback as he hadn't expected the dungeon boss to flee. The Mine Wolf King ran into the passage, howling all the way. Something seemed off about the situation. Feeling that something was amiss, Lin didn't order the skeleton warriors to pursue. Instead, he had them retreat to his side. The iron doors on both sides of the passage swung open amidst the Mine Wolf King's howls, and bloodthirsty wolves emerged from behind the doors. Under the detection spell, the attributes of these wolves were revealed. Level 14 blood wolves with 600 strength, 600 agility, 200 spirit, and 1000 health. Although the individual attributes of the blood wolves were not particularly strong, their sheer numbers, totaling at least 100, were enough to send chills down one's spine. However, Lin did not panic in the face of the wolf pack swarming towards him. Though numerous, their power paled in comparison to his skeleton warriors. With minimal effort, a skeleton warrior slashed through one of the wolves, rewarding Lin with more experience points and materials. A faint smile crossed Lin's lips as he prepared to unleash his special attack, Corpse Explosion. The deafening blast detonated the bodies of the wolves, bits of gore scattering across the mine tunnels. The extreme amplified force of the lethal attack far exceeded what they could withstand. In but a moment, notifications flooded Lin's vision. His experience bar erupted from 32% full to 72% in the blink of an eye. At this point, the hulking Wolf King limped back in stark terror at the carnage before it. Conveniently, several wolf corpses lay near the petrified king's feet. Meeting its gaze coldly, Lin ignited another round of corpse explosions. 3 consecutive blasts engulfed the hapless corpses and the Wolf King alike. Its tortured howls were cut short as its hulking body slammed motionless to the hard mine floor. From felling the king, Lin harvested handsome rewards, 15,000 XP and rare wolf materials. He pressed on through the snaking mine tunnels, soon running into more goblin-like creatures. But to his skeleton army gushing forth, these so-called enhanced monsters were helpless against the tidal wave of undead warriors. The legion of skeletal soldiers flooded through the passages, effortlessly felling one enemy after another. Though mighty themselves, these elite foes provided Lin substantial XP and valuable materials. That's it for video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for next part.